Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Welcome back to Invest Africa. Now remember, we value your suggestions and feedback, so please send us an email to investafrica@abn360.com or interact with us on Twitter through @CNBCAfrica, #InvestAfrica. Now still with me on the desk to explore Windhoek's investment case are my guests Sithole Mbanga, the CEO of the South African Cities Network, and Deon, Nieuwoudt, Executive for Dulux Africa. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. Now Deon, I'm going to start with you. Let's get to the basics, and it's called water. And it's something that Namibia does not have a lot of. It's Windhoek centrally located. It's surrounded by a lot of desert areas, a lot of water restrictions. How do you do business in a country that can't offer you the water you need to produce your goods and services?
Water is obviously very important. What we like about Namibia is the rigid legislation around sustainability and environment. And that's very closely aligned with the agendas that we drive in our company as well. So that gives us sort of an advantage, the fact that we can apply practices that's known in Europe and that we can localize in a market like Namibia.
But Sithole, it is restrictive though, and it's restrictive to growth. How can a country like Namibia and a city like Windhoek breach these barriers? Is there any new technology that they can utilize? I mean, it's just basic things like even consumers watering their gardens once a week.
Well, unfortunately, water, just like energy, has become a very scarce resource. Not least because of climate change and the impact that climate change has had on all of us in the SADC region in particular. There are clear climate predictions that have been made for the SADC region, which have led to the type of tough legislation that all of us are experiencing, both as households or as commercial entities, to start acting responsibly because of the scarcity of that particular natural resource. So it's a bit unfortunate. But what does it mean? I think it means we have to start being innovative. So the notion of a green economy is about utilizing the scarce resources that we have in order to continue to be productive. I know that in the SADC region, the policy imperative or the policy choice that has been made is for all of us to be more adaptive rather than responsive to climate change, which basically means there's an opportunity for us to start afresh.
Now, something that they do have abundance of is infrastructure. Namibia has very well developed road infrastructure because of it being a transport hub. It has 2 main ports by the coast. It has 2 airports. From a Dulux perspective, obviously, to export your product to other markets, is this conducive? Is it enough? And how do you, interpret the infrastructure on the ground?
It's one of the big advantages of Namibia. They've got a very well organized infrastructure in terms of roads, but not only roads, services as well. And that makes it actually very easy, where you don't have to deal with the problems of getting product to the market.
But Sithole, one thing that they don't have is places in between those distances. You know, sometimes towns are 250 to 350 kilometers apart. How do you develop your infrastructure to support this? And, Robert mentioned you've seen an influx of more immigrants, you've seen urbanization. How do you make sure that these urbanized points develop along this fabulous road infrastructure?
Well, urbanization in the context of Namibia provides an opportunity for better policy around issues of densification. So Namibians have to start to think, how do we best densify our countries and the spaces where people live, whether it's Windhoek or Rehoboth or whatever the place might be. So the better densified they are, the more efficiencies you are going to be able to derive from the process of densifying.
Now, apart from densifying, the country is also expanding. It's getting a lot of interest from companies and organizations to host conferences. In September, I'm actually traveling to Windhoek for the Conference of the Parties' 11th conference from the UN on desertification, which is perfectly in line. How can Namibia and Windhoek make itself more attractive for these types of events? And is it a case of investing more into things like conference centers, or can they make do with what they have?
I think it's a question of proper marketing, putting the city out there. I think they've got everything to offer to the market, and it's a beautiful place. It's one of my favorite destinations.
Now, Sithole, they are competing with other SADC countries. I mean, the likes of Johannesburg, Cape Town, you know, Zambia. I'm traveling to Livingston next week. How can Namibia set themselves apart, and especially the city of Windhoek, to be the most attractive destination for these types of conferences?
I think they have to adopt an attitude that says that they are complementing rather than competing. I mean, for starters, I think as Deon says, it's a beautiful country.
It is,
I mean,
absolutely.
the deserts are beautiful, the dunes, it's quite vast. I mean, the land there. So there's lots of opportunities. So they don't need to compete. Rather, I think they need to complement what is already taking place in the whole of SADC from a tourism point of view. So there's an opportunity for them. My caution would be that it needs to be sustainable. So whilst COP is coming to discuss desertification.
So not overinvest like we did with the World Cup.
Well, we didn't overinvest, but I think, yeah, I mean, something like that. But it has to be done in a very sustainable way, because you don't want to create tourism infrastructure for today and then tomorrow there's no one to utilize that infrastructure.
Now, part of that tourism infrastructure is the physical buildings that Windhoek has. And I'm coming back to you on this. Last year, a study came out that land, and specifically buildings and houses and residential estates, are the 4th most expensive in the world. Now, this is a country with a city with 330,000 people. It's on par with countries like Hong Kong. That surely must be a deterrent to investment when you think of the prices of a little house, 1.5 million Namibian dollars.
Well, look, let's put it like this. The land use management regime in Windhoek, again, is not different from the South African one. I mean, most of the lessons were learned from a South African model, which model was imported from European standards.
So why the premium?
Well, look, at the end of the day, there isn't much land in Namibia, and in particular in Windhoek. So obviously the prices are going to go up. What the missing issue is, do they have a good idea of who owns what? Because that's part and parcel of the problem that we are all experiencing. We don't know who owns land and what is it intended to
especially if you talk about historically significant land.
And as a consequence, your land use management system gets to be having, it has a lot of holes in it. Yeah. And that's the reason. And
Deon, from your perspective, I mean, setting up shops, setting up your operations, hopefully the expansion will be there. What's been the service land and the land situation been with the Dulux operations?
Obviously, it is a challenge. There's not a lot of ground. And it's expensive. Obviously, providing services to new developments must be more expensive. But if you continue looking, eventually there is land available that you can occupy and develop.
Because it's outside the valley. I mean, Windhoek is essentially set in a valley. There is area outside, but it comes back to your point about who does the land belong to and how do we manage it. So, Sithole, we are running out of time. Now, Windhoek is the capital of Namibia. It's the financial capital. It's the developmental capital. What can the city do to further grow itself, despite the parameters and despite the restrictions it has?
I think without overemphasizing the densification at the moment, I think it's one issue. I know that 2 years ago, the City Council and the Department of Local Government in Namibia decided to expand the administrative area or jurisdiction of Windhoek as a city. And that was part and parcel of attempting to respond to the demands for more and better land, which will be utilized for commercial and household development.
But how do you make sure that, you know, that the city of Windhoek does not develop in parallel with the other cities? We know we've got Walvis Bay at the coast, we've got Swakopmund, which also have their own restrictions, but how do you make sure that there's enough distribution of investment and not just in Windhoek?
I think, unfortunately, you cannot dictate that. You can only influence the behavior of either your household developments or your commercial developments. You cannot. I mean, it's difficult to predict. It's a very difficult animal to control.
Loaded question, that.
Yeah.
Deon, as a closing, your operations in Namibia, what is the dream? What is the expansion plans? And if we could advise the municipalities and the businesses and the government in Namibia, what is the ideal environment that you need to grow your business?
Urbanization is an African phenomenon, and what makes Windhoek attractive is the fact that their urbanization is very controlled. It's very regulated, which doesn't drop the standards of what you get in Windhoek. What we'd like to do is basically use Windhoek as a springboard, develop our distribution to other areas, and take full opportunity of the market in Windhoek.